Hey guys, this is Carlton. I want to kind of quickly walk you through um, the basic structure, what I've tried to do with the new CSS and HTML, some ideas that I have on there. There's some flexibility, hopefully though, so you guys can use whatever techniques you want. I've just got a few samples in there for suggestions. But let's start with this is index.html, the screen I have up here. I went ahead and just laid out it's a very basic screen, of course. The top bar banner here, and the welcome start touch button, and these two, and the footer area. The main thing here is that these buttons are all now completely CSS, so we even with the curves and stuff, we've got simple CSS to change if we need to make changes later. Obviously, the top bar is a graphic, but we're trying to get away from using graphics for anything where possible so that we can just make CSS changes. And the text especially is not reliant on going back to Photoshop or something to change the text of a button, things like that. So all these buttons have their own styles. The footer here is always going to hug the bottom. So as you're doing your layouts, you'd have your banner, and your body content is the main thing you want to watch the vertical space on for your 1024/768 kiosk. But that's all you should have to worry about, is kind of making sure everything kind of fits nicely in here. And the bottom, you don't have to reposition every time manually. It's always going to hug the bottom and do what it's supposed to. Similarly, these gray buttons that are in here at the bottom on this welcome screen, the button styling, the CSS handles most of that by itself, and it's assigned to the button. The one difference is that I left the positioning as far as left and right manual, so that we have different scenarios. We can move them around as needed and make changes easily if we need to. So, for example, this Spanish button is floated left, and the engagement is floated right, and so it has the simple class assigned, and then manually you can float left to right to position those. So just kind of just a note there. Alright, so let's move on to the heavier screen here. This one is the styleguide.html, and the main intent here is to give you guys one page that you can come to that has most of the key elements laid out right there in it. It has sample codes and sample changes for on-off states, and you can see the classes, how they work together. So I've just got chunks of sections that you would encounter during the different pages that you can reference from this one page, hopefully just copy and paste straight into the application, and maybe apply some actions for the buttons and things like that. That's the intent, is try to keep it as simple and readily available as possible, both visually as a reference that you can view this page, and then also code-wise if you view the source. So we've got the welcome header at the top. The second header here is, of course, the interior header that we did use on those other screens. Moving down this area here, and you'll see in most of the code that I have a wrapper around these. So this wizard area here has a wrapper around it, the area I'm kind of highlighting. This will be encountered on several pages where they're walking through those different steps. We'll have the section header, which these three guys are graphics. I just went ahead and wanted to keep very, very precise on what the brand represented, how the brand represented these. So these are graphics, but they're reusable throughout. So the section header, if we're in the treatment section, the wizard tabs are all CSS. So this is simply the selected state. So you would simply change the class name to selected on the one that you're currently on to change that out. And but there's no graphics involved here. And then similarly on this side, we've got the three different states that you could be in. These are completed, the darker gray ones. This is the current step that you're on, and these have yet to be completed, so they're off. So it's completed, current, and off are the three states there. So you'll see that in the CSS as well. But again, you're just changing class names, and the rest will hold its style there. So I'll show you how that works. Moving down, here's a common scenario. We have the main title and possible subtitle for the page. It's already set for you there, so you can reuse that on a lot of pages. I also went ahead and laid out the three-column structure, which we encounter several times. In case you guys want to use that, you can do whatever you'd like, but I just went ahead and used it mostly for presentation purposes, but it's already set with the correct dimensions and stuff. If you'd like to copy that. So commonly we'll have the header and some subsection main items they like to list underneath these section titles. I did go ahead and do a secondary kind of subtitle style here in case you need to highlight something, and body copy for that. So this is not realistic content or actual content, obviously, but the structure is here for whatever you encounter on those different pages, and you can follow the Photoshop screen samples for those. Another common scenario is when we have a list of items on the page. There's a long list of not symptoms, but you know what I mean, that type of a list of ailments and things like that. At the bottom of a list, we actually we're using this large checkbox button, so they can select this entire section. Click. So obviously the ones below here where the colors don't belong at the same screen as this, but I'm just stacking objects to show you some differences. I'll get into those in a second. There'll be a list. The select button at the bottom. These are functioning. What I would suggest, and what I've done here, is that we use something like jQuery. I know you're using jQuery already for your modal pop-ups, so the library is already there. But if you select this item, you can see it turns off. It's a toggle state on off. And I simply put this alert here for now that as a reminder that this. My thought is that this could also change the state of a hidden form field. So rather than try to style an actual checkbox or other items like that, that are form elements have always been the most limited as far as CSS styling. And so I would think that probably easier to go ahead and use the styling that we've got set for these objects, and then on the back end, since you're already changing out this state graphically, just go at the same time assign the value on off for based on the ID or something for the hidden field. So go ahead and let your form stuff be hidden in the background, make the changes with code, and then when they click submit, you're still submitting your form, but there's no reason to force the user to see a basic HTML form that's difficult to style, especially with something like IE8 and the kiosk style buttons we're trying to do. So that would be my suggestion, but obviously there's a lot of routes you can take. So I've got just a sample of that working in here. Same thing for these. The buttons below here, you'll see these are the large checkbox buttons. They're either called big or large. I can't remember which word I used in the CSS there. And these are on a lot of our second level choices. So they're fairly heavy content-wise, but I think, and this one on the right here shows it can fit a fair amount. You can fit two full lines of both the title and the subtext there. So I don't think we encounter that much that often, but the button can handle quite a bit, depending on some changes we make for the text there. So, but these work the same way, but they have their own style, and in the entire area here for both of these is hot. The other thing to note on these is that they share a common class to get their basic structure, but then you'll notice that they've got green, orange, and blue, and those are choices that you can assign as a secondary class. You can simply add section color orange, section color blue, section color green, and those have notes in the CSS about if it's treatment or whatever beside them. But what happens is on some of the screens you'll see that we're in a certain section like treatment, and it'll have this at the top, and all of the secondary buttons would change, for example, to this orange because we're in the treatment section, and it just kind of helps solidify where you are and what you're doing. So that's how those would be used. It's a simple class to get this large button, and then the section color orange, and it changes out the title color for you, but leaves the rest appropriately styled. All right, and I'll get into some of the code there in a second and show you that. Also, this is completely CSS now. Even the arrow here is a character. It's not a graphic. So these buttons are 100% CSS buttons, and the entire area on these is hot as well. Here's a sample of some instruction text that goes right above forms when we're asking them to kind of walk through and input things. It's slightly smaller, but it's a similar title style. This is a unselected and selected form field. And similarly, the entire keyboard itself has been rebuilt. Also, this is 100% CSS. It's just text and CSS to generate all of this. Same thing here for the character and the space. So, the one thing, I did not want to get too heavy with these buttons and try to make them look hokey, like fake actual buttons. I want to keep a clean style with the new brand. So all I've done is I'm using this slight shadow underneath it to kind of lift the key and make it feel more like a tactile keyboard slightly without going overboard. So that's and you'll see how this is positioned. This is used underneath the larger keyboard there. I don't see a need for it so much on the calculator type, the numpad. But something like this, I think it really benefits. If you turn that on and off, you'll see that it really helps it feel like a keyboard more without getting heavy. And this is just simply the centered. It's just showing the larger CSS start button for the welcome screen. Okay, and as you notice, you can see it's kind of cutting it off as I scroll up and down. The bottom bar is hugging here. You obviously don't want your content going under that, but that's to save you time on positioning. Like I mentioned, that you don't have to do that every time. One more div to have to go figure out exactly how high it should be. So I've just got the hugging the bottom. You'll also notice that these buttons are now Spanish. So I'll get into that. I had one idea that I played with quickly. I didn't spend a lot of time on it. You guys may already have a good solution for the multilingual stuff, but as far as all of the navigation, like the buttons and things changing out, I'll show you what I had in mind for that. So we'll switch over. Okay, if we get into the code here, you'll see that this is what I mentioned, this wizard area that I showed you first. There's a wizard wrapper. So most of the things that I'm dealing with, that I'm designed here, have a wrapper around them. So it will be one nice chunk that you can kind of take and drop in, and it's kind of going to be doing its thing already for you. Primarily, you can just add some actions. So most of the things will have a wrapper class around them, so you can see the full section. Let's see. Here's also, this is the tabs that we saw, the tab sections for the birth date and gender and things. And you'll see here this one is tabs selected. So that's the only difference that we had to make. These other ones are simply class tabs, and then you just change it to tab selected to get the kind of knocked out bottom and top tab looking feel to it. These comments here, yeah, you definitely want to leave these. These actually help it stay complete CSS, and in IE8 as well as other browsers. These secondary ones here will draw the horizontal line underneath that goes the full width, to kind of make the tabs feel like the top edge of the paper or whatever. And there's a couple of them there, and that's just for adjustments for things like IE8. So you do want to leave that to make sure it works on your kiosk. These are the actual list items here for the steps. On the right side, we had the circles that were showing that it was a green one for the current one and the darker gray for completed and things like that. So that's what these are. They look a lot more complicated than they are. They're simple list items with a class of wizard step complete, wizard step current, or wizard step off. So again, you're just changing class names. This is simply one transparent ping that I've used. This for positioning, and it's the same for all of them. You don't ever have to worry about changing that out. I just found that even though it somewhat worked with just the code, that by simply placing this transparent ping in there, it forced it to hold the position, and we just kind of got rid of some worries going back and forth with different browsers. So that's all that is. It actually is just a list item that you're changing class names on, and that gets the wizard. All right. As far as the checkbox buttons, now this is one thing to note. A lot of the areas that you see that look a little, not wordy, they're a little long-winded as far as code-wise. I normally started with something pretty simple. For example, this button here was one line of code in modern programming. However, in order to get it to work correctly in IE8, with the curved buttons, the curved corners and borders, and sometimes we have the icon on the button and getting the text aligned on it. This is the structure that I found worked consistently for us. So it went from one line of code to about 10 or 12, and that's unfortunate. But I did try to go ahead and comment them here to make them at least easily recognizable, and hopefully just copy paste, and you're done with the button. But this structure was pretty important to get it to work that way. What I've done is there's a wrapper around the button, and it has the actual background color and curved area and borders if needed. So all those are set there, and then the HTC hack or fix is applied to that layer in the back. That gets the curved corners working in IE8, which it can't do. However, that hack screws up a lot of other things if you try to put it all together in one button and style it there. So what I've done is separated those out. The background, like I mentioned, will handle the background curve and borders. Going up above there, we have this is the checkbox, for example, and it's turned on or off. You can see here. But the checkbox is a graphic that has the large check mark and everything. So icons like a back arrow or a cancel arrow or this checkbox, that there are graphics placed on the button. Those are on the next layer up. And then moving up, we have the actual text, and in this case this was the large button, so we have some subtext, but the text is here. So we've kind of stacked going up a layer, and on the very top you'll see that they each have a hotspot, and this will cover the entire key or button area, so their finger will easily be able to click on those. So that's what the hotspot is. So the curved stuff separate with HTC hack, and then any images like icons if needed, the text itself, and then the hotspot on top. So not overly complicated, but it's a lot wordier than we often get in current coding, so wanted to point that out. So that's the example of the large, and this is just checkbox. So checkbox and big checkbox. Those are the two styles you saw on those list items there. Similarly, we can see here, this is what I was mentioning, the section color green has simply been added as a second class to the big checkbox buttons text. So that title area there, ongoing health condition, I simply changed it by saying section color green, and it overrides with an important tag. It overrides the color for those titles, and that's how you'll accomplish that applying the appropriate color for the section. All right, let's see, fonts. If we go back, you'll notice that it had changed out to Spanish, but you notice on this computer it's slightly heavy. I don't have very many fonts installed on the one I'm using right now. But in the code, you'll see that the fonts are defined here. We've got the actual very specific brand specific font first, and then we go down to Helvetica Neue by itself, and then Helvetica and Arial, and down to sans serif. So it should degrade gracefully, regardless. This way, it gives you some flexibility. If you guys are able to install the actual Helvetica 55 on the systems, and it can pull that one, great. If not, it's going to try to go down until it keeps. But all of these should pull off the same basic look and feel without degrading too much from the brand. But that should be kind of preset for you and give you some. I know there were some issues on whether or not you could or could not install the fonts, so that's what that's for. The structure of the CSS, hopefully, I've tried to be fairly wordy in the style names, so that maybe a little longer than normal. But if we're not sitting in the same room, that hopefully will prevent some back and forth questions. Hopefully, it's pretty obvious. Keyboard wrapper and keyboard row and things like that. And the key back and key backspace are those two kind of specific ones with the arrows and stuff. So hopefully that's pretty apparent what's going on there. I wanted you guys to be able to reuse and make it flexible. So like I mentioned, those large checkbox buttons, most of it's reused, but then you can change the color separately if you need to, that kind of stuff. For the languages, let me show you how that's working. This is styles.css, and it has most of the style code in it. I did make a text English and a text Spanish. And so what I've done here is you'll see that there's placeholders just as examples, not for everything, but examples for some of the buttons. So text continue, text back, text cancel, text help, text Spanish, text survey. Those are some of our main buttons in the examples I used. And the English version is exactly the same. And all I'm doing is assigning what I want for those button titles here, and then in Spanish here. So this is a trick that may work for you guys, for at least for navigation, or you may have another solution. That's fine too. I did run into one bug, which maybe kind of stopped my approach on this. So you may have some luck if you do further testing. I noticed that the upside down question mark and exclamation points did not convert correctly when I declared them here. You're supposed to be able to use the alt code, so \168 is this upside down question mark in Spanish, and that did not work for me, at least in my initial tests. So it may be something you want to watch out for to see if this is the solution we use or not. But again, this is still readable in Spanish, but not 100% correct to do the question marks this way. But obviously, this is also the only one that used the questions. So rather than it saying, do you need help and do you have questions, it could just say preguntas y ayuda, so questions and help, as a title. So if that's the only button that has that, it may be just better to change it in Spanish to preguntas y ayuda and be done with it. But I'll leave that up to you guys. That's the only bug I did see. It works pretty smoothly, and I'll show you how that works. So in the style guide here, oops, sorry. Here we go. So it points to English or Spanish. So basically, clicking the button would change out this one class: text English, text Spanish, text English, text Spanish. And by doing that, all of those buttons automatically change their content to the correct value. But there's no other changes. You're just changing what that points to. And I like that in that it also gives you a clean spot to go to and look at the same list in two places and easily add a new one at the bottom. And again, those are accomplished by simply adding this class. You could just put an empty span wherever you want the text to be and say text continue or text back. So you put an empty span with this class wherever the text would normally be, and then the text is actually pulled here from the CSS. And all of these accent marks and whatnot worked fine for me. Like I said, it was only the upside down question marks that I had and exclamations I had an issue with. So I think that gets it. The IE8 created several issues. So like I said, if some of the code looks a little wordy, that's normally where that came from. Is trying to make sure that it worked for the user in those scenarios, and hopefully this will give you what you need to copy and paste chunks into your actual pages and hopefully speed things up for you. That was the intent anyway. As I mentioned, the modal that you're using now I think is jQuery, which I think is great and pretty easy to style. So there's a of the screens you guys have been provided, there's the example of what a modal should look like. It's pretty straightforward, slightly transparent, dark background with a border on it, and all of those are right there in the controls. If you need help with the styling of the modal in jQuery, let me know. But probably it's something you guys can just look at the code you have and make a few changes. It's not too different from what you have now, I believe. But just let me know if you do. Thanks. Hope that helps you out, and let me know if you need anything else.